Hello, Tom Andrews, and welcome to Do Good and Do Well. I am so excited. I finally got you on this podcast. How are you today?
Hello, Sarah Fox. Yes, I'm good, thank you. Um, I'm looking forward to, although a little bit apprehensive towards our conversation, but I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you.
Good, good. Okay, so let's kick off. First question, tell us a bit about yourself. I know you very well, but maybe people who are listening don't. So who are you, Tom
Who are you?
Andrews?
This is going to be about half an hour answer. Is that all
That's
right?
fine.
I'll
Yeah,
just
loads of
keep on.
time.
Well, I'm currently head of member support at ACEVO, which is a charity that supports charity leaders and CEOs. I oversee their national mentoring program. I kind of facilitate member meetings, but my kind of main role there is to provide one-to-one support for those charity leaders. So that might be giving them information, providing guidance, but really a lot of the time it's about providing time for those people to stop and pause, for them to go, oh, this is what's going on for me, and to be with them, for them to feel heard and supported. So that's what I'm doing now. My background has always kind of been in the charity and voluntary sector. I was kind of volunteering in India with Tibetan refugees, and then did other odd jobs and volunteering. Over time, I grew and ran two creative charities over probably about 20 years or so. Um, and then sort of the latter part, I trained as a coach, supporting on a freelance basis, supporting individual leaders, but also as a professional counsellor, and I worked in the community and in a hospice. So kind of that's me, well, the work me bit.
Mm.
Um, I also like board games and ambient music, and I support a really unsuccessful football team, Charlton Athletic.
Oh, yes. I mean, I think uh, it's so. I mean, I've heard you talk about what you do for a long time. So for those of you who don't know, Tom and I work
So when your
together.
eyes start glazing
When
over,
that's that. Oh God, I've heard this before. But I suppose what really strikes me about hearing that is that there's I don't know if this is the right word, but there's such a coherence, that isn't the right word, to what you have done in your career. So it feels like, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it feels like it's been quite a kind of, again, not finding the right word, but like a natural journey. Like everything feels like it fits somehow. Like the work that you're doing now has come from the work that you did 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And none of it is knowing you, none of it's like a surprise, I guess. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. And I think, yeah, I would agree with you. There does feel a thread, and that sounds like it's quite mechanical. Um, I've planned and plotted and stuff, but it, it has come through accident and organic side. But I do feel kind of very grateful in some ways of feeling around a purpose. And
Mm.
so, when sort of quite early days, I was kind of exposed to some real extreme poverty and injustice, and that gave a kind of an obligation. And we'll probably talk about lots of different things, but an obligation and a push to saying, I want to do something. I've got to do something. And of course, we'll probably talk about the pros and cons of that drive.
Mm. Mm.
But yeah, it does feel like at certain aspects there was individual sort of doing sort of side of things, and then bringing different people together, and then using arts and side, and learning as I go along. And so I'm still on that learning journey, and I'm kind of excited about the next chapter as well. I've got a couple of other little things brewing, which I need to think about. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I feel grateful having that sort of flow, as it were.
I wanted to ask you about being a founder, I suppose this question's about, in the sense that you witnessed injustice, you felt, okay, I need to do something, and that motivated you to some kind of action. And then and one of those actions was to set up, I think Music for Change was your first charity that you set up. And I'm wondering, how do you go from having an idea to then like really kind of setting that up and making it happen? Especially like if I think about myself in my, this philosophy of do good and do well and the things that I'm trying to do, it feels like it's quite early days in many ways, and that can feel quite tough because you're trying to learn about it, you're trying to articulate what it is you're doing, you're trying to influence and bring people on board so that they can support both you and the vision. And so there's all these sort of parts to the puzzle, and I just wonder kind of whether you can talk us through that a bit. Like, how do you keep going, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah, founders are interesting characters, I think. It's interesting, I think, fantastic, but also can be challenging for other people working with founders, and the ending of that. I think, yeah, that I think with my experience that there was underlined with that drive and wanting to do something and make a difference, thinking, okay, I've got 40 or 50 years and then I'm going to be dead in my life. Actually, what can I do to make an impact that makes a difference in the world in some shape or form? So underlying anything, there is that drive and that purpose and the care. And then that links with kind of an ideas side. I kind of have a couple of images around that. First is a sort of sculpture side of things, that it takes a long time to carve off a clay thing and but in the background, and I don't know if you're like that, you're still buzzing around going, actually, can I phrase this differently? Can I put that, is this quite the right name? And so it's honing that down and shaving that off and up until you get to, actually, this is what it's about. And at the same time, there's something I always have a feeling of a candle, because it feels quite precious and personal at the same time. So you're lighting a candle, you've got this little idea, and to start with, you're putting your hands around it, you're protecting it, because it could go out. If I mentioned it to someone, I know from my, and someone said, no, that's rubbish. I might go, all right, okay, maybe you're right, yeah. Or someone else is doing that. You don't need. So to start with, it's nurturing that idea and that flame. And over time, letting it go a bit stronger so you can bring your hands down and it grows, and then you can speak to other people. So there's something about, for me anyway, there was the thought, took some time. There was doing research, saying, actually, is anyone else doing this? Is there a need? And challenging myself, the growing it, and then speaking to some people to challenge it a bit, which is a bit like well, I'm coming up with two, a bit like having medicine. I know it's good for me to speak to these people, but it's going to be, it's quite hard hearing, no, you've got this bit wrong, or that's not going to work, but actually it's useful in the long run. So I'm talking a lot, but I think the drive is yeah, that purpose and that and enthusiasm. And I can talk about some of the tough bits as well.
I love those images. I remember when in the early days of People United, which for those of you who don't know is a charity exploring how arts and creativity can build kinder, more caring communities. But how long did it take us to kind of come up with that quite succinct phrase? I think that carving of, you know, what is it we're doing? What is this thing? Is such a it's such a yeah, really great way of thinking about it. And then that idea of the candle, well, I think you know that it can be quite painful if that candle goes out for whatever reason, or you are not in a position to nurture it. You know, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing with people is around how do we keep you in this place of strength so that you can nurture, and then you can kind of take your hands away and let more people in to support you. I wonder, like, if you were to, I don't know if this is one of your ideas, but if you were to start another organization, what would these kind of thing, what's the thing you want to remember?
Well, firstly, I think I'd remember I don't want to start another organisation
Yeah.
because it's blooming tough. It's blooming tough. And even before you set it up, there's probably years of going around and things coming together. So I don't want to do that. I've purposely thought, how can I get my next thing I'm thinking about, just little early thoughts, is how can you get the joy and the innovation and the bits and pieces that certainly I from the start without 10 years down the line actually having to worry about HR and policies and fundraising bits. How can you get that spirit or that side of things without having to set up a structure, an
Mm,
organization? So, and I suppose I'd remember if I was thinking back, I'd remember sort of a couple of things. One, the tough bits, and you remember, and you talked about there that it's quite tough from your side setting up um, and letting people in on something that you want to be there for others, but you've got to look after yourselves. Um, so remembering a little bit of that struggle and that tough bit, and actually, while I'm speaking that, I also should acknowledge that while I found it challenging, for many other people, it was even more challenging. I'm
yeah.
privileged in a number of ways. I'm white, male, um, middle class background, so that supported me being able to write applications or know some of the language. But certainly at the start, no one, I got a lot of no's. There was a lot of skepticism because at that time, arts and social change or arts and sort of breaking down barriers was quite at its infancy. Um, so, started with kind of no contacts and started. So sort of remembering that hard work, but also linked to that, remembering the enthusiasm and the idealism. So I think there's quite a bit, as much as I could think about doing it, there's things I can learn from my past self,
Mm,
which was about that enthusiasm and idealism. Um, I kind of like the word. I mean, I know people when they don't like this sort of idea that I want to change the world, but actually, I quite like it
mm,
because it
mm,
feels actually there's a spirit there. Let's give it a go. And in some ways, when people were telling me no a lot of the time, I thought actually there's a bit of me that thinks actually if everyone was doing this, I might get a bit bored with it. So if everyone was doing the thing I wanted to do, I wouldn't need to do it.
mm,
And so actually that friction, that challenge and that pushback shows actually this is something a little bit different. And this is something that isn't the norm. And so there's an
mm.
energy to that. And there's something you think actually I can plow a furrow here of something that might bring something new or different. I don't want to do something that someone else can do better, but actually, is there a new plow I can furrow? No, that's the other way around.
Well, yeah. Oh my goodness, there's so many things you've just said then. It's so interesting because when I you know, kind of launched this coaching practice business, I initially started writing funding applications, because I just naturally, that was my natural way of like, how do I make money? I write a funding application. And it's very quickly thought, hang on a minute, I don't even like writing funding applications. Like that's not where I want to be. And that's where I sort of started then to move into what I think is more of a like a business mindset around how do you bring money into your business in a way that's not reliant on funders, you know, trust foundations, all of that kind of thing. So when you were saying, you know, like how can you know, those questions about how can we still have the joy and the drive and the motivation and the idealism without some of those, without it having to be this particular structure. But I think when you've been in that not-for-profit charity world for so long, you're kind of wired in a way to think that that's the way you do it. But I think there are so many other models that you can look at. And then when you were talking about that, really liking the idea of idealism, I agree. Like that word, like do-gooder, or the idea of being worthy, and it's that, what, you know, these conversations about being woke, like what is wrong with these things? Like we need more people to be idealistic. We want people to be doing good. We want people to feel that sense of worthiness. Like I would much rather have that than to be the opposite of those things. Because I just think there can be quite a lot of judgment on people who I was going to say that I don't know why this can't, but like that real sense of self and understanding of their values and what matters to them, those pro-social values, it can feel a bit, it can feel like there's a lot of tension between that and the world as it is today, our lovely capitalist world. Yeah, so there's so many things then just sparked lots of thoughts. I want to come back to that sense of purpose that you talked about, because I think one of the biggest things, I mean, you taught me many things, many brilliant things, but one of the biggest things was to, this is a phrase from like I've heard in the coaching world, like stay in your own lane. So like don't get distracted by all the other things that are going on. And I think you really had a sense of where we were heading. Like we might not have known the map and all the details, but we knew where we were heading and what kind of mattered. But also I know that you are a massive ideas person. You have, like me, you have like loads of ideas all the time. And then, you know, when you are working in a charity, you've got all these funding pots that you could possibly apply for that want you to do certain things. And we always came back to this idea of, but what is it we're doing? What matters to us? I just wonder whether you can talk a bit about that and how you balanced being an ideas person and wanting to do lots of things with this sense of clarity around direction.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I learned a lot from you and the rest of the team and all the people I've worked with as well. You know, it's you're all in it together, aren't you? And you're working it out. I spoke to quite a lot of people, a lot of leaders. And often the thing is actually I'm blagging it a little bit. I'm seeing what I can do, and you're reacting and changing, and that's okay because it's part of this journey and we're building. It's not about this bit, it's about the path and the journey that we're on. Yeah, it's interesting about the purpose. I mean, I think there is something about the clarity about actually what are we about, because that can be diffused sometimes because there's a lovely pot over here, or someone's doing something good over here, or this is the flavor of the month over here. So I think there is something about clarity about why we are here. And that helps, I think, being quite early in your development, because that early element of what our mission is still fresh. So why are we here? Both individually, but also as an organization. This is what we're about. And keep going back to that. Now, the balance with the ideas, I'm not sure I did balance it. I mean, I think there was often too many ideas. I think we kept saying, didn't we, at different times, less but better.
Yeah.
Let's do less, but let's do that better. Um, we did I did at one point we did develop a sort of little matrix, which I didn't think we used that often, but I think it's actually a really helpful tool. So if you've got lots of things, getting a little table and putting down the left-hand
Mm,
column, what are the key things to achieve your mission here? So
mm,
what are the key? So it might have been about empathy, or it might have been about values. Does this do this? Does it do that? But also, are we the best people to do it?
yeah. Do we have
Do we have the
resources, capacity?
capacity, the resources?
Mm,
Does it bring us the money that we need? Um,
mm,
does it just feel right? Is there a spark to it? Is there a joy to it as well? And if you
yeah.
kind of look at that and map it out, actually, there are some things. Um, I'd really like to do that project, but actually, this one over here actually enables us to achieve our mission better.
Mm,
So it takes I suppose all of this is about finding the right ideas. And of course, it can't all be planned, but it is a bit about taking that ego out a little bit, I think, and thinking about actually what enables us to make the biggest impact for
mm.
people. It's not about us
And
or individual, it's about the organization and its mission.
yeah, but I also think it is about us as well, because we are if you're a freelancer or you're a leader, you have to be thinking about what works for you as well, because that you're the person that's going to be driving that forward.
Mm,
And it's interesting you talk about that matrix, because that's one of the exercises that I use in my group program now to help people to figure out what they say yes to and what they say no to,
mm,
and you create your own questions, but there has to be on that, do I have the capacity? Like, do I have the capacity to do this? Do I
mm,
have the energy to do this? Does
mm,
it feel exciting to me? Because, do I feel like I can be energized by this rather than being drained by this? And I think
yeah,
so because there's this more kind of societal idea that you've got to be useful, you've got to be productive, you've got to be doing things all the time, and I think in the charity sector, arts and culture, there's this thing about outcomes, what the outcomes, what you're doing, what you creating, what you're making, what you're producing, that it makes sense for us as humans to be looking all over the place about, even though we might have a ton of stuff that we're doing already, but to have one eye ahead going, okay, what's next? What should we do? What should we be doing next? What's the next idea? What's the next project?
mm,
And I think, certainly in my roles within organizations, I know that that's brought a lot of energy that, I've liked that at times, but also it's flipping exhausting. Because you're not able to be present with what you've got. It's like this constant what's next, what's next, what's next, what are we producing? If we're not producing, then we're not useful.
mm. My favorite question is how, because it feels like, yeah, how are we going to do this? It feels like the process. And I think that certainly in a lot of participatory work where you're working with people, actually the how bit's the most important bit. It's how we start, how we end, how we engage with people, how we provide a space where people can feel safe and could express themselves. How do we change the power dynamic? How do we think by putting that in place, then some of the outcomes and the outputs flow from that? And how are we within an organization, and how do we go about doing this side of things? Of course, it isn't easy, but like you said, with targets, people want to know how many people and what impact. But yeah, I like the question, how.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. I wonder if we can sort of talk about a bit about your work with charity leaders now, kind of, that idea of how, given the world right now and all of the challenges, and and for some of the people that I'm coaching, I get a sense of what's going on for them, but I wonder, what's your sense of what's happening, right now for people? What are those challenges that they're facing?
Well, the caveat to this is that I, with my work, I hear more of the challenges.
Yeah, of course.
So I
Yeah.
do know that and I think it's important to remember the joy, the learning, the fulfillment, and the huge sense of, yeah, fulfillment that people get out of their roles.
Mm.
So that's there. What I'm hearing, or what I hear is, yeah, is a sense of overwhelm from a lot of people. Um, and I suppose if I had to put it into some sort of categories, there's sort of things that are facing the organization. So firstly, finance, funding, um, with cost of living crisis, poverty, inequality. Charities are being expected, and people expected to do more for less. They push the boat out for the pandemic, and it just keeps coming. So
Mm.
there's something about the finance and the funding, something about staff with organizations. So the people I'm speaking to can be one person to massive charities. So that these are sort of generalized, but there's something about
Mm.
staff, supporting people, staff's well-being and volunteers, and that side, but also retention and recruitment. There's a huge churn at the moment, and that takes time and emotional energy. Um, there's big issues, wider issues that I think people are facing or looking into, from climate change to EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion. How do we look at these things in a systematic way rather than just a tick box? So there's thinking about that side. And I think certainly for some campaigning organisations, there's a feeling of the civic space is shrinking a little bit. And how can you express ourselves and be forthright about what's going on and issues, while also not looking over your shoulder whether you're doing. So I think there's a lot of external things. Internally, for the individual leader, I think there's kind of two aspects. I mean, there's lots more, but one
Mm.
around relationships, both relationships with staff and people side, but particularly with trustees and chairs. When it's a stressed and strained stuff, little cracks become bigger and magnified. And those relational things aren't just, oh, we'll do this or we'll fill out a form. They take emotional energy, they're hard. It's especially when you're feeling isolated and alone, actually having to deal with either confrontation or bullying or a whole range of
Mm.
different things with uh, other people, or becomes a very hard thing. So there's that. And then we've touched on it, but of course there's the well-being and burnout. And I think there's a whole range of things building up and it feels like a building up side that people haven't had that breathing space to recover. But I think the nature of some of our stuff is that there's a volume, there's a sheer volume, like running up the escalator the wrong way. You're working hard
Yeah.
and you're still. But then there's also for smaller organizations, I always used to find actually that it was the breadth that was the hard bit, that took time and energy. Because at one point I was going to say mending the photocopy to people have photocopy, but you're doing the internet's down, I'm doing that. The other thing,
Yeah.
you're thinking of a high level strategic plan, and then you're fundraising, and then you're doing, so you have to be a bit of everything. And that, I think that is really tiring. And so I think it's about thinking about both those side of things. But yeah, I think you're not alone if you're feeling that actually there's a lot going on.
Yeah, that certainly echoes what I'm hearing. Some of it, some of those themes in the education sector as well, with head teachers and kind of and teachers and I just had this when you were talking then, I was thinking about being freelance, having a freelance business, and that breadth that you just talked about. 1 minute you're doing the printer and that just really resonated with me when you said that. And then I had an image of that printer that we had in the People United office.
The HP LaserJet 4.
Which every time you try to print something, it would get stuck. So I'm just wondering how many hours we spent trying to pull paper out of that printer. But that's kind of something that we're laughing, but those are those sorts of issues that take, they do take up time, and they get, you feel frustrated, and you're like, oh, I just need someone to come and fix this thing for me. And I think you were really right to say at the beginning about, of course you hear all the challenges, and one of my favorite questions to ask someone at the beginning of a coaching session is like, what's gone really well for you this week? Like, what have you smiled about? What's brought you joy and happiness? Because I think sometimes we forget we're so so busy doing the things and thinking about what's not working, that having that time to sit and go, actually, I did this really well this week.
Yeah.
I managed that relationship well, or I fixed the photocopier or whatever. I don't think people have photocopiers anymore. I'm pretty sure. Does anyone? Anyway.
Yeah. Let's have a chat about photocopies. Scanner, printers, photocopy. Yeah.
Do write in and let us know if you have a photocopier. Where am I going with this? But yeah, I think that I suppose I'm curious about you talked about relationships with sort of others and trustees and your staff, and the whole thing about helping people to look after their own well-being is so important, because burnout is a thing. I'm also wondering about relationship with self. And so if I think about, I ran a workshop the other day around how as a freelance business you can market yourself without feeling icky, because you can go, oh, I've got a business, I need to bring, I need people to know about me, I need people to pay me to do my thing because I've got a business. It needs to be sustainable, and I want it to be sustainable because I want it to have impact, and I want it to have lasting impact. But the idea of people pressing submit on that blog post that they've had in their a Word document for ages, or going on social media, or networking with others, whatever that marketing is, can feel really gross, because we don't want to be like those exploitative, manipulative, capitalist people. We want to be charitable and generous and kind and good, in quotes. And a lot of the work I do with people is about that, understanding the relationship with yourself, and how we're so wedded to a certain identity. it can really stop us from listening to ourselves and what we really want. So I just wonder about your experience in terms of people developing the relationship they have with themselves and being able to put their own needs in the mix somehow, and to be able to listen to what they want, even if it feels a bit squiffy to their identity or what they believe their like real core values are. It's a bit of a wordy question, but tell me what you
No.
think, Tom Andrews.
I'd like to ask you lots of questions, but yeah. No, that makes sense. I think you're right about that. That the starting point when you talked about, you know, people recognizing what they're doing well makes such a difference, and then jotting that down at the end of the day, just keeping a note of that. In regard to the self side, yeah, I mean, I can understand around the marketing side. I was rubbish at that, and I find it very. I recognize that some bits I'm good at, some bits I'm not, and some bits I really don't feel comfortable with. I feel much actually more comfortable being within an organization than myself, actually. And maybe that's a confidence thing, maybe that's something. But actually, I feel far more comfortable saying, actually, this is what it's about. So I recognize. I think you're right about where does the I bit come in, and when maybe we'll talk a little bit in a moment about self-care and that side of things generally. But in regard to that self-awareness and stuff, I think that's important. I realized after, you know, going through some challenging times about me and my working habits and bits and pieces, I realized that often I started with the organization and whatever here. For those listening on the podcast, I'm putting it one hand is here. Started here, and then, well, when I get that sorted, then I'll come to my other hand, which is looking after myself here. You know, the problem is you often don't get past this bit. There's always something else to do, so you never get on to the right hand, which is the other hand, which is about what your own priorities. And so I wondered about doing it the other way around. If I start with actually what lights me, what gives me joy, what are my priorities, then I know, and you know, everyone's different, but I know from my side, I naturally go and do this stuff anyway, because I'm going to believe in that and I'm going to do that. But it enables me to start with actually what would support me, what would help me and enable me to get to that other bit. I suppose it's that usual thing, you know. If I'm going to breathe out, I need to breathe in a bit. If I'm going to breathe out, I need to breathe in first.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds, I was going to say so simple. Like the idea is, I think you're right. Like if we are resourced and happy and you know, I think it's also important to say that it's not always down to the individual. Like there are bigger systemic structures in place that stop some of that stuff happening. But where we do have some control, where we can make some changes, I think it does sound, you know, it is simple, but it's so, but also it's not. Like we are humans and we're messy and we're complicated and we're wired in certain ways. And I suppose what's my question? My question is, so what do you do then? Like if we're starting with this hand, and what's in our control, what does that look like practically? Like what would you offer to a listener who's thinking, you know, I really want to make a difference in the world. I want to not be an idiot, basically. I want to do something good. I want to contribute positively, but I don't want to do it in a way that sort of sacrifices myself. What Do you think that's possible? What would you say to them?
Is it possible? I don't know. I mean, I've tried and I'm still trying. You could go back and forth. I think firstly, there's something to recognize that this work can be hard and frustrating and push us, and actually is part of that is the nature of it. Like you said, we're dealing with systemic barriers and systemic sides of things, and it can be magnified because we care. It isn't just up in our heads here, it's in our hearts and in our emotions. It's more than just a sort of logical thing. And if we're going from our values, then that's all in there. We're putting ourselves there, which again magnifies it. So I think recognize actually this is going to be challenging and tough and bits and pieces. I think that only becomes an issue if becomes your default. You know, if you've got seasons of actually it's going to be busy at this point, and then I can rest a bit, I can replenish. I can then go again, or that this is going to be a busy period. But just as we could get in the habits of bad things, we can get in the habits of good things as well. I think there's, I don't know, maybe three things. And this isn't a particular theory or whatever. I could make it into a theory, couldn't I? That's sort of let's say.
Let's do it.
Or it's the ASP theory I'm coming up with right now.
You heard it first here,
the
listeners.
ASP theory. Firstly, there's something about acknowledging. Actually, this is the situation. Okay, I'm feeling fearful. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Okay, this is the situation and this is the impact that it has on me. So that self-awareness, rather than just going down that tunnel, oh, this is how it is, I'm not going to, actually stepping back a bit and having that awareness. And recognizing when your kind of bucket of energy is coming up. So firstly, I think, let's say A is acknowledge. S, I think there's something about sharing. So once you've done that, it's getting a bit of distance. So sharing with someone like you or a friend or family or a colleague or sharing in a diary or a journal, getting it out of your head.
Yes.
Getting that little bit of a distance. Okay, there it is. There it is. And then I think the last bit is about plan. It's getting a bit of a plan. Again, this is about getting, okay, that's the situation. I've acknowledged that. Let's get a little bit of a plan together. Let's have a container. These are the, our funding thing or whatever, or my own business, my own personal business. Let's have a little bit of a plan. We have business plans for the organization. Let's have a little plan for me. So over the next 3 months, how do I want to be? What does that look like? Let's have some little steps, and not being too heavy, not feeling, oh, it's another thing to do.
Yeah.
But actually, here's a bit of a plan and revisit that. So does that make what was it?
Acknowledge, share, and
And
plan.
plan. Yeah, I'm sure there's some other things I've missed, but so yeah, I think there's an acknowledge, share, talk with other people, get a bit of distance, and then have a bit of a plan about it.
I think those kind of tools and models, I've got some instructions on my wall. One of them which says how to stop brooding, because I know I can get into these brooding moments. And it kind of just details some instructions of what to do, because I think when you're in it, it can be really hard to remember how to support yourself. And so it's just as you say, like writing out the thing so you see it as it is, like having really accessible, whatever you want to call them, instructions out there so that you can go, right, okay, I need that, and I recognize that I'm brooding. What do I do next? And then you work your way through it. So kind of, I always think of it as a bit like those washing machine instructions. You get, you know, and get like the troubleshooting at the end. Like when we're
Replace this.
yeah. Oh, I'm feeling like this. Okay, what do we do next? And you know, that kind of creating those support systems for yourself when you're in moments of when you are feeling more resourceful, so that in times when you're not, when you're feeling vulnerable or on the edge of burnout. I mean, if you're in burnout, then you know, seeing your GP, you know, even things like see your GP written down,
Absolutely. Yeah.
having those kind of instructions. Yeah, so I'm gonna, yeah, ASP copyright Tom Andrews.
Yeah. I like that what you've said though about the when you're in the middle of it. I think that's absolutely right. I sometimes think of it as a kind of tornado sort of thing. When you're in it, you can't kind of look out, and everything becomes just too much. And yes, your thing about having your at one point a while ago, I had something Tom's worry plan, which
Yeah.
had 10 little things. A, go for a walk. If that doesn't work, B, go for a walk and listen to these tracks, upbeat
Oh
music.
yeah.
3, go to somewhere quiet. 4, write down something. 5, speak to whatever. So yeah, we've all got our own little paths around how we do it.
Yeah. And it is finding stuff that works for you, isn't it? It's because I think the danger is there's so much stuff out there online, particularly around well-being, and lots of it is useful, but also we all have our own experiences and our own ways of working and our own working situations and our family situations and you know, people we're caring for, or we might be on our own, or you know, and so I think it's sometimes I think with this stuff, if we can hold it a bit more lightly, and I don't want to sound flippant, but it can feel so hard and tense and difficult. We feel like somehow our life is on the line, or the lives of like loads of other people are on the line. And I think sometimes we're missing that playfulness, and I loved like when we would go for a walk and talks and have pudding in the pub, you know, and we wouldn't necessarily have to like come up with an agenda for it, or a list of actions that we had to do at the end, but it was a way of us getting out. It's a way of us kind of just allowing space for some of that thinking to happen without it feeling really pressured. And it was fun going to have treacle sponge pudding in a random pub in the woods, you know.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, I'm going slightly going off on one, but I've got a couple more questions before
Yes.
we wrap up, if that's all right. So the first one, well, so when you think of do good and do well, what comes to mind?
Well, apart from your podcast, it's a I suppose it's a lot of what we've been talking about. For me, it's about how we doing. How are we doing? How are we doing? How are we doing for the planet? How are we doing it for people and communities around the world in different places? How are we doing the causes and values that we believe in? And also how are we doing for our family and I don't know, our next door neighbor, our friends and ourselves. And it's finding a balance that works. So yeah, for me, it's about how are we doing? Maybe also, and I'm sure someone's already said this, also maybe it's about how are we being as well?
No
Because
one else says that.
there's a lot of doing. We do a lot of doing.
Yeah.
It's one thing after another, and maybe there's a bit more being as well as a bit.
Yeah, maybe I should change the podcast title to Be Good, Be Well.
Do
Do you
good,
think? Because I think
do
there is
good, be well. Yeah, or do
there's
good. Yeah.
yeah, because there is something I'm really trying to notice, this sense of, you know, how we're supposed to be in producing all the time and doing. And one of my another favorite question is, you know, how do you want to be in this moment? You know, how not what you want to do, but how do you want to be? So yeah. every time I do this podcast, there's a new name for it. So there's a new suggestion. Tom, I wanted to
Yes,
ask you
Sarah.
this. What's the biggest gift we can give ourselves, do you think?
Charlton Athletic season ticket. No.
Noted for next birthday.
That can be edited out. Let's have a thoughtful pause, and then we say something a bit more sensible. I think it's different for different people. Your gift is going to be different from mine, different from a number of the people listening. But then saying that, I think I would say space. A time to pause and to step back. Because if we allow ourselves that time to step back and pause, have a little bit of distance and a little bit of perspective, I suppose then we can assess what gift we need, but we do it with kind of wisdom and thoughtfulness. So that would be my thing, space.
Space. Yes, thank you. How do people find out more about you if they want to, Tom? Or like ACEVO, or if you're a charity doing your thinking, oh my goodness, this sounds like I really need this help. How do people find you?
So a couple of ways. In regard to ACEVO, yeah, I should have joined when I was running things. I really would recommend it. So ACEVO is acevo.org.uk, and if you are running a charity or you're a senior leaders with want to become a CEO or a leader, I'd really recommend it. Whether you're one person or you run a really big an organization, being part of a kind of community to feel that you're not alone, and having someone to be able to speak to have a mentor, have a community and lots of information. Just have a look on the website. So that's acevo.org.uk. And yeah, if you are an existing member and you need to speak to someone, you can just get in touch with me via the details there, and then we book up a time to speak. From my personal side, I've got a kind of scrappy, out of date website that I made myself a little while ago, which people can have a look at. It's called tomandrews.org.uk. But I suppose the most useful thing is that there's a contact form there. And if you do want to get in touch, generally the messages I get are about various pharmaceutical products and various sort of cryptocurrency people. But so if people did want to get in touch and say hello, you're very welcome to via that contact page. And I hope I've got these other little things sort of bubbling up. There may be other opportunities to connect with people in the future, because that's it's interesting speaking, because I've for the last bit of time I've been listening, and so hopefully can link with you, Sarah, in the future as well, and see and let people know if there are other things people can get involved in some point in the future.
Yeah, amazing. Well, you have to come back on and share the next bit with us, these ideas. Thank you, Tom. I'm so happy we got to do this, because it's fun spending time with you, and I always really just I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and your wisdom. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. And I appreciate your listening here and being able to pick out the salient points and your openness and integrity. I mean, that's when we were talking beforehand, you know, that's central to all of this, isn't it? Having that integrity and being open to it all. So thank you.
Thank you. I will put all the links to the all the links that we've mentioned in the show notes if anyone wants them. And yeah, thank you so much, Tom.
It's a pleasure.